In this Sikha, the Rebbe is going to be exploring the fact that the Torah starts with a Beis, Bereishis bara Elikim, rather than with an Aleph. And the Rebbe says we find a number of explanations for this. And the Rebbe is going to discuss 3 explanations, discuss some questions on each one of them. The Rebbe is then going to give his own explanation and show how all the other 3 explanations really tie very much into that explanation. So the first explanation is given in the Yerushalmi, that an Aleph would be an expression or a Rosh Tevis, an abbreviation for the word Arira, curse, where a Beis is a Rosh Tevis of Bracha. And that's why the Torah starts with a Beis. The Medrash speaks about the shape of the letter Beis. The Beis is closed on 3 sides, open from the 4th side. This represents the way the world, Hashem created the world in that way, that one side is open, the northern side was left unfinished. If anyone wants to claim that they could be as powerful as Hashem, let them go and try and finish it off. Kabbalah discusses the idea that we always need to remember that our Torah is already one stage down. There's the Torah, the Aleph of Torah would be the Torah the way it's in Atzilus. The Beis represents the way the Torah is being drawn down into the worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. The Rebbe asks a question on each of these. If the reason for the Torah starting with a Beis is because it's an abbreviation for Bracha, well, there's plenty of other negative words that also start with a Beis, and surely there's plenty of other good and positive words that start with an Aleph. The Torah could have started with an Aleph for the same price. In regards to the shape of the Beis being like the shape of the world, the Rebbe says seemingly the logic should be the other way around. We know the whole world was created for the Torah. The world was created through the Torah. The Torah shouldn't have to start with a Beis to fit in with the world. If anything, the world should have to fit in with the way things are in Torah. And finally, in regards to the idea that the Torah starts with a Beis because the Torah, the way we have it, is already in the worlds of Bria and Yetzirah and Asiyah, whereas the Aleph would represent the Torah the way it's in Atzilus, the Rebbe says, well, the Torah has the same words in each one of the worlds. That means even the Torah the way it's in Atzilus would also start with Bereishis, bara Elikim, with a Beis. How would we then explain why the Torah in Atzilus is starting with a Beis? How would we explain how the Torah, or even higher than Atzilus, is starting with a Beis? And finally, the Rebbe has one general question on all of this. We know a fascinating story in the Gemara, where Talmai HaMelech wanted that 70 Zakanim should translate the Torah for him in Greek. And for a number of reasons, different things in the Torah had to be slightly changed, otherwise Talmai HaMelech and the Goyim wouldn't have gotten it. And Hashem made a miracle that all 70 Zakanim translated everything in exactly the same way. And the first example that the Gemara discusses is in the Pasuk Bereishis bara Elikim. They actually translated it as Elokim bara Bereishis, putting the word Elokim first, which means for him the Torah wouldn't have started with a Beis, rather with an Aleph. Which really tells us that somehow, no matter what explanation would have been given for all these nice reasons that it should start with a Beis, for Talmai HaMelech that wouldn't have been good enough. So we need to understand why our Torah needs to start with a Beis, and by Talmai it specifically needed to start with an Aleph. So the Rebbe explains that we know there's a Gemara that tells us on a pasuk why was Al Me'av the Aretz, why was the land destroyed? Al Azvam es Teirasi, because they abandoned my Torah, which the Gemara says means Shaloi Berchu b'Torah Tchila. The Yidden didn't make a bracha on the Torah first. The Bach, Rabbeinu Yoina, explain that even though these Yidden learned lots and lots of Torah, but they were missing something very, very basic. They were missing the Kedusha of Torah, the idea of really becoming connected to the Noisei na Torah, as we say in the bracha, that we say before learning Torah. They were missing this element of connecting to the Noisei na Torah, the Kedusha of Hashem, the Kedusha of the Torah, which goes beyond and before the Seichel and the logic of Torah. In other words, in Torah we have 2 things. Yes, there is the part that we learn Torah, we need to understand Torah, but then there is the part that we need to connect to Hashem, the giver of the Torah. And the order needs to be that comes first. Number 1 comes that dveikus, that connection to the giver of the Torah. Be'erchu b'Torah tchila, that they made the bracha on the Torah first. Then comes the idea of learning Torah and trying to understand it. Says the Rebbe, this then is the simple reason why the Torah starts with a Beis and not with an Aleph. That means when we are learning the Torah, when we are approaching already the understanding of the Torah, we always must remember that is Beis. That's stage number 2. Because before that we had to have the Aleph of the Torah. The stage number 1 which is the idea that we are connecting to Hashem, we're connecting to the element of Torah, which is higher than words, letters, than logic, and so on and so forth. Well, first of all, now we also understand why even the Torah in the world of Atzilus would start with a Beis. Because in every level of Torah, there's always these two aspects. Number one, there is what Torah is telling us, the revealed aspect of what Torah is telling us, the logic of Torah. And then there is the Aleph, meaning the Noisen HaTorah, the stage number one that needs to come even before that, the part that's beyond the logic and the words and the letters of Torah. The Rebbe now goes ahead and connects the three reasons that we said before with this simple reason of why the Torah starts with a Beis and not with an Aleph. So again, the way we explained it now is that Torah is starting with a Beis, telling us that whenever we're approaching the learning of Torah, we always need to see it that that's already stage number two, a Beis, and before that, there needed to be an Aleph, the connection to the Noisen HaTorah. And the Rebbe says, we're going to see that when we learn Torah in this way, it's going to impact the Torah itself and the effect that the Torah has both on the person and on the world. And this is going to be related to the three explanations we said before, the explanation of Kabbalah, to remember that the Torah, the Aleph of Torah is the Torah in Atzilus, the Beis is the way it comes down into Bria. We're going to be speaking about the effect that it has on the person, that there's a possibility that it could be in a way of bracha or chas v'shalom the other way around. And finally, the impact that it's going to have on the world, whether the world ends up being closed off and fixed up. And the Rebbe explains it like this. The Rebbe says, when a person learns Torah with a complete devotion and dedication to the Noisen HaTorah, this is the way the Torah remains connected and one with Hashem. If not chas v'shalom, then he's causing a separation between Torah and Hashem. The Rebbe says this is then the connection to the idea we spoke about from Kabbalah, that there's the way the Torah is in Atzilus and the Torah the way it's in Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. Atzilus is generally a world of unity with Hashem, a place where there's only godliness. The lower worlds are already separation. And this is what we meant before when we said that what Kabbalah is telling us is, as far as the Aleph and the Beis, that there needs to be, the attitude in Torah needs to be, when you learn Torah with, as we said, Bereishis Torah Tchila, making the bracha on the Torah first, that allows Torah to always remain in the Atzilus Dika type of way, meaning connected to Hashem, rather than in a way that it's being separated as it ends up in the lower worlds. Point number two, the Rebbe says, as far as the person is concerned, we know that Chazal tell us that when a person learns Torah in the right way, then the Torah is a samachayim, it's a potion of life for him. If chas v'shalom not, then it could be a poison of death. Here too the Rebbe says this is exactly the same point that we were saying regarding whether Torah is like on the level of an Aleph or a Beis. Is it a chas v'shalom going to be like a curse to the person or a blessing? If the person learns the Torah in a way of Beis, which means that he recognizes that when I'm learning the Torah al pi seichel, this is only stage number two. But before this, there was already the Noisen HaTorah, my connection to the giver of the Torah, then that Beis is a lashon of bracha. Then that Beis is a blessing. It becomes a blessing for the person, life for the person. If chas v'shalom, the person is learning Torah with the attitude that this is number Aleph, that this is the first thing, my seichel is what it starts with, that's what we quoted before from the Gemara as saying that would imply an inyan of a curse, chas v'shalom. Finally, the Rebbe says, as far as the shape of the Beis, which we spoke about, the idea of the Beis not being closed off from all sides, so the Rebbe says, if we want to be able to close off the world, meaning be able to fix up the world, that the world should be the way it's supposed to be, and that is by really making the world recognize that Hashem is the balabos, that Hashem is the boss of the world. This is also when we learn Torah with this attitude, recognizing that it's a Beis, that the seichel of Torah is only the second stage, but before that, there's the Kedushas HaTorah. This itself allows for us to really make the world the way it's supposed to be, fixing up the world to be completely connected to Hashem. Now, getting back to the story of Talmai HaMelech, all of this says that it only applies to a Yid. A Yid, when he's learning Torah, has to know that the part that he's learning, the Seichel of the Torah, that's only stage number two. But then there's the Noisen HaTorah that's completely beyond that. When a guy learns Torah, a guy doesn't learn Torah just for the sake of Torah. A guy is learning Torah just to know what he has to do. And therefore, which part of Torah does he have a connection to is only to those parts of Torah that is written clearly, the part that Torah is teaching him what to do. And therefore, for him, yes, that is the Aleph of Torah. For him, the Torah starts with Aleph, meaning to say, it's not starting with the stage before that. It's starting just with what Torah tells us inside. And as we say in the bracha that we were discussing before, v'nosan lanu es Torasai, who the kedushas haTorah, the birchas haTorah is for a yid. The Eibishter gave us his Torah, and that is that the yid himself is connected. Only the yid is connected to that level that's beyond the Torah itself. The Rebbe now connects it also with the whole idea of Parshas Bereishis being read on Simchas Torah, and we know that Simchas Torah we're dancing with the Torah, and the Zohar tells us that when we're dancing with the Torah, we adorn the Torah with the crown of Torah. And we know that the crown goes beyond, higher than the head, beyond logic, and so on and so forth. And says the Rebbe, this is the very, very same point. Number one, on Simchas Torah, we're dancing with the Torah, we're rejoicing with the giver of the Torah, with the crown of Torah. And then after that, we approach the actual reading of the Torah and the learning of the Torah. And in this way, we are connecting not only to the Torah itself, but of course, we are representing our dedication and devotion to the Nois in our Torah, to Hashem himself.